Wi-Fi.
I'll just go on to it, like, I don't think there's anything, and it was just like you want to say, good.
Yeah, it's a. I use winches.
Yeah, I think that place, push them to shove. Try to get.
All right.
Yeah, income taxes. It used to be though, I know that.
You know what we were thinking of when we did this? That's why.
Welcome everyone. This is, I'm just trying to get back to my. Nice. So this is in fact my last.
Sophie, can you speak up?
No. No, I thought that we would wing it, George, and you could just pretend like you knew what I was saying.
It's always good to really hear it, though.
So, I was just saying this, I can't believe it's already my last, finance committee meeting. And I'm having a hard time finding my packet. So. Welcome to the agenda review. All right, is there anything you want to add to the agenda?
Probably the best part of the package.
No.
No. So if there's nothing to add, I thought we would jump into the budget, and with the budget packet, you received the 2023 year end. Mike, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, if you don't mind. So we did very good on the budget. We were at 98% of our revenue, $675,000, $675,087. And our expenses were $644,066. So we did very well, but we're still completing our audits. The 2021's completed, and he's just wrapping up the 2022. And in our budget, we had 23,000 for audits. So we're gonna book that receivable, but we're still coming in expenses under budget, probably just over $8,000. So, you know, we talked about it in third quarter, everything figured out to where it should be. We did a little bit better in fourth quarter, keeping expenses down. It's just nice to see the revenue line. I'm very happy to announce that part of that budget was making a $50,000 payment back to the MRC for the money that they took out of their reserves while securing the plant. That's one of many payments to come, but we were able to put that in this year, and hopefully when we approve the payables, that is one of the payables on the list. And we have those funds in our operating account and are prepared to make that payment.
Let's talk about 2024. We, just to review process quickly, the board presented this budget at the annual meeting as the budget that we were gonna consider. And we've been running on the budget the first 3 weeks of the year. And Mike, I would love to take credit for the 2024 budget. So, you have not made any changes since it was originally introduced. So I don't know if the finance committee wants to review it, make a recommendation to the board, or if you want to simply let it go to the board and.
Just a reminder on this budget, a couple things, there's. When you put in the $75,000 line item down in expenses that we're paying back to the reserve funds, to the wealth management, there's really not much of a difference than last year's budget. But we're doing a lot of different things with some of our funds. We've put a really robust dollar amount into consulting. A lot of that will be on branding, marketing, education, and outreach. Over $100,000 we've put into that. And then also staffing. We are currently with staffing using our grant funds, but we've used about half of those in this year. And so when we bring staffing on in the new year, we will have to, after the other half's used, we'll have to. So, you know, there's a big increase in the dollar amount, but part of that increase is because of the 75,000. And the other great thing about this budget is we're not taking anything from reserves in our operating cash, which we always used to do. Due to the management fee and lease payments coming in now, we don't need to take anything into reserves to complete this budget.
I'd go even farther because the budget's inflated because we've got that utilities thing in there, the
Yes.
$80,000. If you take that out, we're basically down to last year's budget size. And then if you take out that 75, we're actually, budget's actually less, really. You know, we're paying ourselves back that 75. So I think it looks great, personally. Nice job, Mike.
I'm just wondering what the impact's gonna be when we run out of that. Using 20 grand. I'm guessing the administrator will go down a bit anyway, because we're not fully staffed yet, it's taking about get up to speed.
Right. When I did this, there's a few weeks now that have flip-flopped.
Right.
But you can see that we approved in 2023, 212 in administration. I mean, that's everything. That's our rents and everything else. And you can see that's gone up to 294, but that would include some increases that we've had, but that would include staff, payroll taxes, and also we switched the retirement program, and that was a big difference in that. So staff is about, are you asking me what the staff hit is after the funds are used up? About 20, I'd say depending on what they come in at, 25 to 35,000. After the grant funds are used up is what MRC did, that's what it did.
And you don't need to having to go into switch that. We'll have that covered.
Right, we won't, because remember, you always have that contingency amount too in miscellaneous, so there's a little bit of buffers in here. So I don't, and we've planned on staff, we've planned on benefits for staff, that's in this budget.
Want to do anything with this budget, which is. You want to recommend what is it? Kevin, did you have?
I'm not on this committee officially yet.
Well, okay.
Sure, yes.
So, without doing this, a show of hands, I would say it's unanimous. And we're gonna go on to review of cash investments. George gave us an incredibly detailed, wonderful report. Did you have questions about that? So we can discuss all of that.
Board meeting.
Huh?
Board meeting.
Gordon?
So George, did you hear that?
Not a word.
We're gonna get you to review your asset management report at the board meeting.
Hi. Happy to do it.
Thank you.
Can you see our breakdown of our invested funds here? I think this will be a project for the coming treasurer and Mike work with first, well, get by some before. Mike and I have also had a conversation about what as soon as it's settled down a little bit for him, would be a good opportunity for us to maybe re-examine our MRC's financial relationships with the bank and the.
I think now that we don't have I'll use the word hemorrhaging cash out of the wealth management accounts and stuff, everything's sitting idle. We have an approved budget now, so part of, hopefully by next quarter, between the new treasurer, George, and I, we will work out, start focusing back on these wealth management accounts and present the board with options of what looks like the best avenues to go down with those.
No, I like to just leave with a little work. And then the payables. You have them?
They were everybody's board package.
So I'm not sure I would qualify the payback to internal transfer of funds for the payables. However, putting it on this list gives the one-stop shopping to give money, the approval to make.
Yeah,
Um,
the checks come from Clayton and Long, and that's the operational account.
yes,
The payback to this fund is coming into the operational account, either be it through the lease or the management fee. So that's why I'm trying to make the transition the way I am.
so when I look at this, I see routine expenses with the exception of $2,000 transfer back to our investments.
I'm wondering whether it might be helpful going forward. Kind of echoing with the auditors that to record on the MRC balance sheet receivable from fund. So that, number one, we know it's there, number two, we know how much it is. How much we're expecting to get paid back from that fund. And then we don't have to start fiddling with where to put the money. Or where to take it from. It is part. It's not a part of the lease, it really is something. This is transit. And I feel from the point of view of accept accounting principles, it's probably a better idea to capitalize that amount, put it on our balance sheet, as we see we're capable of doing so.
So. Yes, I think we're in those steps. George and I haven't had much time to work on this, but one of the asks that will be in the next meeting is we'd like to open a savings account at another financial institute to put this 50,000 in, just as a placeholder and paper trail till we go and look at what we're doing. And that gives us a good paper trail. We're not mixing with the other funds. So that is going to be an ask at, I believe it's the next meeting. I'm not sure if that was part of this meeting. So sorry. So that will be an ask. And I think that's a start to what you're requesting. The only thing that you confuse me on, and listen, I'm not an accountant. The management fee, a good portion of that, the way that I tried to construct it was the payback. There's a portion that pays what we have into it for staff and what we're doing clerically, but there's also a portion to pay back those funds. It's a very high fee.
I agree. The question is, so where do we see that past that on our balance sheet? And where's the liability?
but. George, are you?
Yep. Go ahead. I can try to take a stab at this because I think the asset management letter also addresses this, because there's a fundamental change in the nature of the activities of the MRC going forward. I think the MRC had been engaged primarily both in development, keeping the asset, the facility alive, and covering bypass, from the time when Coastal left the site until the time when IRR was brought in. And then since July 1st, 2023, the MRC no longer has the liability for bypass disposal. The cost of that has been passed on to Coastal. They no longer have liability for maintaining the facility. Liability is that has been passed on to Coastal. So it means a different relationship between the MRC and the joint venture. And I think what Bob asked for is basically, let's start to separate the MRC and the joint venture. We can show the investment that the joint venture has made to get the MRC to this point, and then let's start looking at returns on that investment going forward. And so part of that is establishing the baseline for what that investment was, which Mike has drafts of, and we've talked a little about, but we haven't nailed down 100%. And then part of it is realizing that the revenues to the MRC going forward, other than dues, which include the management fee and the site lease, are include amounts to be returned to the joint venture. And we need to, I think we'll have some recommendations for that probably at the next finance committee, but I think that's the general nature of the exercise, which is to do a little bit more separation of the joint venture and the MRC, because the MRC is now an administration agent that has revenue for its services, which is something it didn't have before. And it can use that to provide returns to the joint venture, which are the owners of the facilities that the MRC is managing for it. So I don't know if that helps, but that's how I look at it. And, we're going to go through that and get to the point where, and Michael has drafts that I'm looking at, I haven't had time to focus on, but we will in the next quarter look at what was the nature of that investment, what are the best ways to return on it, and what are the best ways to separate the role of the MRC from the role of the joint venture in ways that we maybe haven't done previously, but now there are new roles, and it makes more sense to do that a little bit more carefully than we had.
I don't think we actually have a receivable to book. I think that's our goal, is to pay ourselves back into the investment fund, but
It's not really guaranteed.
No,
and
it's
it's,
not.
uh,
There's no note.
there's no note, and I just don't see how you book that.
But I know that Mike has tracked those expenses. With exact, he knows to the penny how much the MRC used to support that facility. And I take George's point that now we're in a different world. But we're still taking the position that some of that fee is intended as a reallocation of fund. We're somehow recognizing intuitively that money is owed, and I put that in quotation marks. And from an accounting standpoint, I'm just wondering whether or not, I mean, we know we know what the amount is. I'm wondering whether there's a way of, call it equity or return on equity. Maybe you don't want to call it that for the next purposes.
Mm.
I'm wondering what the auditor is saying about that series of transactions and whether he might have some suggestions to make, or just say, hey, don't create a problem or one doesn't exist. I'd be curious.
I mean, the money is coming back into MRC. How we account for that within the internal accounts is, I think, irrelevant.
But legally, the MRC is different from the joint venture. I mean, they're at pains, they make separate accounts, they have a separate set of books for the joint venture, they allocate equities in the joint venture. It's a very separate animal from the MRC, which, as you pointed out, is basically an administrative entity.
Mm-hmm.
Things beyond the just thinking, George, about the way we accounted for this when we were in the park contract. And it was like the MRC would make a decision to move it into the invested funds, right? And
Yep.
then be tracked in that way.
Yes,
But this day, if it's sitting in our contingency or our general operating account, you can call up George at any moment and ask what a individual community share of the venture is, and it's all tracked, right, George?
well, not entirely. It's all tracked for those funds that were part of the joint venture, but the operating fund always had an independent life. And so the operating account was not allocated, the idea being that dues and returns from PERC would cover the expenses. And if there was money left over, that would be pushed forward, but often there were shortfalls requiring further, especially after 2016, there were shortfalls requiring further transfers. So I think it was a different structure, and each of those accounts had a separate role in the prior agreements that aren't there anymore because the agreements have changed. So, I think there's two things. One is simplification. There's no reason to have a cash collateral account that's separate from a tip fee stabilization account. It ought to be one set of investments. And similarly, the difference between the D&D account and the contingency account, and even the operating account at this point, have largely become less relevant. So part of it is consolidating accounts so that there's less to do. And part of it is, and the way to think of it is the joint venture made advances to the work of getting the Hamden facility developed and then returning it to operation. And this is actually one way to look at it is as an internal loan, and you're looking at a return of funds advanced. So I think, I was hoping that we'd have a 2022 and a 2023 audit from Donald ready so we could make sure we're using the right language when we look at that. But I think that's the essence of it. It's the equivalent of funds advanced for the purpose by the joining members, and it's a return of that advance, whether that's a return on equity or a return of a loan, is actually something of a academic accounting discussion, but we'll need the right words to characterize it.
So what that says to me is that's not an issue we need to tackle today. Okay. Since I'm not gonna be here tomorrow on this. I
Hand
said
it
that.
off. Hand it off.
So, the last item, payables. Can we recommend the payables to the board?
Support that.
Sure, the second one.
Kevin?
Yes.
All right.
And the bottom line number we're looking for is 80,369 minus 104.
So, yeah, but we add that to the total we just.
I mean, that's
So,
not bad, actually.
973. And then the last item that I had on the workable agenda that was not really written on the agenda, you notice I added the accounts receivable in. The aged account receivable was in the packet. The reason that I wanted to show you that was number one, look at how small the number of people that hold anything is. And then if you look, they are all essentially current. So, I created.
That's changed already.
Oh, you mean
For the better.
Truckin?
Yeah,
the better.
oh, yeah.
All right, there we go.
Is the town of Mount Desert caught up?
What's that?
Is the town of Mount Desert caught up?
If they're not on the list for dues, then
Month over.
they probably, I mean, I just deposited a big deposit yesterday, so I apologize.
I just thought.
I'll chase that down
Great.
today.
Great to see.
Might
you.
happen.
Okay.
Is there anything else we can talk about finance?
Did you want to mention the accounts to the
I
finance
did.
committee, or do you want it in the next meeting?
I'll mention it here and there.
Okay.
So, Mike and I are going to be asking for permission to open accounts with Amsterdam Savings Bank. The purpose of that account is.
It's just to put that 50,000 in on the interim while we are trying to keep money aside. I mean, not to get into the weeds, but the contingency account we currently have has about $1 million in it. And that is from the sale and from the transition of this facility. So I don't want to get it into that, mix it with that funds. So we'd like to, Andrew Scoggin really stepped out of the box over the last year and a half and helped us when we were looking at funding the facility possibly on our own, and they did a lot of connections. So while we're just looking someplace to stick this to track it, I just assume we'll get permission to count on them. And Andrew Scoggins also handling the MWS for Innovative, their daily checks, I guess, their daily checks and deposits.
All right, does anybody have a problem with that? Kevin?
No.
No, all right, there we go. On that note, anybody have anything else? Nothing else they want to say?
I think the other thing we're gonna vote on, just so people are aware, is to have each of the officers be able to sign checks. I think right now, I don't know if it's specific by name or just by position, but I think it's limited to the president and treasurer. And now we'll try to make it position specific, so president, treasurer, and vice president, just to increase our flexibility.
So you are right, it's by name, and how the bank accepts that is from the minutes that we're gonna, from today. So we just have to be clear when we get to that part of the meeting. And then I'll be able to present that to the first, and rather than it being like Karen and Sophie, it will now be president, vice president, and treasurer. All the other stuff will stay in play, like 2 signatures for over $100,000 and all that. That is the only kind of thing.
And, would you please make sure you take the notes? I have a little problem with that.
I don't, yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I'm gonna, I'll make sure that happens. I gotta get the minutes right away and stuff, so I'll have a conversation with John. Just start.
I do, and I have a little
Always.
toggle thing.
Oh, you do? Yeah, they don't have those anymore. It's an app.
Bob or whatever. you
Yeah.
call it,
Oh,
Yeah.
It like my fault. So then it'd be in the-
Hey, tell me. We were just talking about it.
With that, I'm gonna, that's done.
Thank you. Just in time. Yeah, just in time.
I didn't break. Can you ask what she was?
So, I think, so we just wrapped up the finance committee meeting. We're gonna take a 2-minute break before proceeding for our regular meetings. Or maybe
Yeah, okay.
3 to 5 minutes.
It was just. You shut us off? Yeah, we just.
So
Back
shut
around.
off. Just gonna be live. Well.
We'll see.
No, that's.